Hello and welcome to another episode of Pitch Masters with me, your host, Danny Fontaine. And this week I've got a very special guest, the multi-faceted, incredibly talented Melody Wilding. She is a best-selling author. She wrote Managing Up and Trust Yourself. She's also an award-winning executive coach, amongst many other things, and we have an absolutely phenomenal conversation. We talk about why high achievers still crumble in front of powerful people. We talk about the hidden struggle of the sensitive striver, and while she was talking, I self-diagnosed myself as a sensitive striver. See if you do as well. She also tells me about how to stop being intimidated by titles and authority, and why trust, credibility, and social proof matter more than just being good. It's all about performing under pressure. It's all about being yourself and elevating your own strengths. And I think you will thoroughly enjoy it. Of course, if you haven't already, you can check out my book, Pitch: How to Captivate and Convince Any Audience on the Planet. This is my end-to-end guide on everything you will ever need to know about pitching. If you like the episode, please do follow, like, share, because there'll be more episodes coming very, very soon. But as always, let me stop rambling on. Let's get to the good stuff in the episode. So if you're ready, I want you to sit back, relax, and get ready to take some notes. Melody Wilding, what an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on. And the first question I'm going to ask you is the same question that I ask all of my guests, which is, if there is someone out there who somehow has never heard of Melody Wilding, how do you pitch yourself?
First, thank you for having me. Super excited to be here with you. And I would say if you are someone who wants to find your professional power position, if you want to be at that intersection of confidence in yourself plus influence with others, then I'm the person you come to. And I've written 2 books. My most recent book is called Managing Up: How to Get What You Need from the People in Charge. My first book is called Trust Yourself. And I am all about leveraging my background as a therapist, a human behavior professor. I've been an executive coach now for 15 years to really help people gain the respect, the recognition, the rewards that they deserve.
Amazing. There is so much there that we are going to unpack, because so much of it is applicable to pitching and presenting, of course. But I'm interested in hearing a bit more of your story. So these days you are hugely influential. You've got books out. You coach CEOs. How did you get to where you were from maybe around the age of 18? Is this what you always wanted to do with your life?
In some ways, yes, and in other ways, no. I was one of those weird kids that did grow up knowing I wanted to be a therapist. I wanted to do something with psychology, mostly because I was a very perceptive kid. I was always fascinated by relationship dynamics and why people did what they did or didn't do what they didn't do. And I did not grow up in a rich family. I don't come from money. And so I felt like when I was around 18, first getting into the workforce, getting out of college, I felt like I was really dropped into that world
Mm.
with no direction. And I looked at my peers around me who had parents that had 9 to 5 jobs. Both of my parents own their own businesses. So I didn't have that corporate structure. I didn't have my parents coming home at 6 p.m. and us sitting around the dinner table saying how they were applying for a promotion or building relationships with people at work. I didn't have any of that. And so I never absorbed a lot of those unwritten rules around how the workplace works, how you're meant to position yourself in your career, even certain ways of speaking or vernacular.
Right.
I had no idea. So my observational skills came in very handy, as did realizing that the key to being successful in the workplace is understanding human behavior. So the moment that I realized, my background as a therapist, understanding why might someone have certain insecurities, or why do they respond when you frame things a certain way because you're picking up on what their desires are or their goals are. That's when those two things came together, was when I really realized, oh, there's a gap to fill here for other people who might be like me. And there was certainly, back when I got started, no one back then who was talking about navigating some of these mental emotional dynamics in the workplace. That has changed over the past 15 years or so, but it was a open area that I could find myself in, and here we are today.
And what was it like making that transition then from therapist to, and was it a straight transit? Was it like therapy and then CEO coach? What was the bridge in the middle?
Not at all. And what's interesting is that I listened to very well meaning advisors and mentors and people in my life who said, you're never going to make money as a therapist. And so, why don't you take your background? You're smart, go into something that is better well paying, maybe technology or healthcare, something that's a bit more stable. And so that's what I did. I went into the corporate world, had full time roles and on
Yeah.
that side of the industry, but in the meantime was always doing coaching and counseling on the side because it was the thing I couldn't not do, if you know what I
Right,
mean.
right. Yeah,
Sometimes you're just so interested in something that you even do it as your hobby. And so
yeah.
while I was working full time and getting that experience, I was writing for career websites, and eh, you know those things were getting syndicated in places like Yahoo and Fast Company, and I had uh, journalists reaching out to me for comments on different topics, and all of that started to snowball. The fork in the road for me was this so-called stable path. I was actually made redundant from my role, where out of the blue, I was performing, I thought, very well. I was getting positive performance reviews. I
Yeah.
thought my boss and I had a great relationship, but out of the blue, one day it was your services are no longer needed. And so that was the fork in the road. Do I actually go all in on this path that I've been pursuing on the side for
Yeah.
so many years? And that was the point where I said, this has more traction, and my heart is in this so much more.
And so when you started the new path, was it plain sailing or was it bumpy?
I think as a business owner, it's you hope it will one day be smooth sailing, but it's always bumpy. And
Right.
this was it for sure was very bumpy for me because at the time I didn't have a very clear sense of who I was serving and how I was
Mm,
helping them. And what's interesting is I sort of backed my way into how I was helping people. I would write about topics that interest me, things like imposter syndrome and advocating
right.
for yourself. And I didn't really have a this is my lane and this is what I have to offer, but I wrote about things that interested me. I saw what resonated with people. I wrote more about that. And as clients came to me and I listened to their problems, I would write and produce more content on that. And this actually came to a head when in I think it was I want to say 2018 or so, I had a publisher approach me about writing a book. And they said, we've been following you online. We would love for you to write a book for us. It can be about whatever you want. So just put a proposal together and we'll go from there, which I did. And I put together the proposal that I thought that this publishing company would publish. It wasn't necessarily
Right.
a thing I would be excited to write about.
Hmm.
And long story short, I was able to secure a contract, realize I needed a literary agent to represent me because once you read those contracts, you very quickly realize
Yeah.
you're in above your head. And my very wise literary agent said, I can tell this is not the book you actually want to write. So why don't you spend some time figuring out what that is? And that was when I had to go through this somewhat scientific, but mostly unscientific process of figuring out who am I helping and what am I helping them with. And that that eventually I had a light bulb moment that led me to I work with people who I call sensitive strivers. So
Hmm.
they are very intuitive, they are perceptive, they are observant, they're thoughtful, but they're also very driven. They put a lot of pressure on themselves to
Yeah.
succeed. They
Yeah.
want to do well. They want to be growing in their careers. And those two things, when they come together, can be a tremendous asset. They can also be a hindrance if you don't know how to direct them or leverage them properly in the workplace. And and also, if you've, as you were listening to my story, you may realize, oh, you are a sensitive striver, which is true.
I
I
feel a
was
bit like I
helping,
might be as well.
yes,
Yes. But I can tell that you
yeah,
are also. Yeah.
yeah. And so it has not been, I would say it feels more like when you own your own business, and I think any career, sometimes it's like you have a flashlight on a path and you can see maybe 1 to 2 steps in front of you. But as you
Mm.
keep moving forward, the other steps immediately in front of you keep illuminating themselves. And so that's what it's felt like at times, is that each step forward, I start to get more clarity. But of course, it's a lot of testing. It's a lot of failing and doing things that don't
Yeah.
work or nobody signs up for or nobody cares about, or things that you think are going to do great and you'll get a response for, and then it's crickets. So you do have to be ready for that.
And if you're comfortable answering this question, what do you think the biggest failure is that you've had in your journey, and what did you learn from it?
It's a great question. I would say I'll answer this in two ways. I have had things that are flat out failures where I have launched programs, nobody signs up for them.
Right.
And it's, to me, a failure because I didn't reach the goals I had set out for myself. I wasted a lot of time, sometimes a lot of money pouring into something to get zero return from it. But of course, it may sound trite to say it is still a learning experience,
Of
because
course.
in many of those cases, I've realized, oh, I never should have put something out there without beta testing it first, without
Right.
getting audience feedback and having people, for example, put down a deposit for a program so I know
Right.
that they're bought in before I started
Yeah.
building the whole thing. So there are failures like that. And then there are, being a sensitive striver, there are ones that are not, that other people wouldn't judge as failures. But to me, I know I could have done better. And so now I look back at even my first book, and I look at ways that we could have launched it differently or positioned it differently, pitch it differently. And I don't consider it a failure. Again, the book has been successful. It's reached so many people. It's impacted so many people. But being a sensitive striver, there's those internal standards you set for yourself. And when you feel like you're falling short of that bar, uh, it's easy to look back and think, "Ugh, I don't know why I didn't see that then."
There's almost perhaps irony isn't the right word exactly, but it sounds like you give advice to people just like you. And I'm sure if someone had said what you've just said to me, you wouldn't be saying anything about failure. You would be finding all of the positive things. So are you your own worst critic?
Oh, 100%. Oh, yes. I am. I like to say that I'm the worst boss to work for for myself,
Right.
because I am so harsh on me as the employee. Um, but yes, we teach what we most need to learn. That is certainly true in my case, that I have struggled with a lot of the things my clients struggle with, whether it's
Yeah.
imposter syndrome, taking things personally, being able to hold your own with more dominant personalities. those are all journeys I have taken. And so being able to speak to it with that level of literal empathy, I've been in your shoes, but also combining the actual tactical side of my background, the coaching work I've done,
Yeah.
I think that is actually a real reason. We hear that all the time of why people come to coach with us is they see it in my story, they resonate with
Yeah.
my style and my
Yeah.
approach and the way I speak, but also in the credibility that I have to offer. And so I see that as a big part of
Mm.
pitching yourself and standing out in this world, whether you are a business owner or you are in corporate, whatever it is, having that social proof and that credibility is everything. You need other people to vouch for you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll come on to pitching proper in a moment, but if we stick with sensitive strivers for a second, what is it? I don't know whether you give advice or strategies or it's a much longer process, but if someone approached you with uh, similar symptoms, if you like, as you've just described, and or you can just use me if you like, because I'm an overthinker and I put pressure on myself and I'm my own worst critic, and all the things really that you've just outlined. So what do you do with someone like me?
Well, first, we need to prioritize because this
Hmm.
is the most common experience of a sensitive striver is this feeling of it's almost like a rubber band ball or a ball of yarn, if you've ever had
Mm.
that, and it's all tangled up. And it can feel like, well, I take things personally. I overthink. I'm a people pleaser. It's this whole mess of struggles. How do you know what thread to pull on to actually start unraveling it? And that's why in my first book, Trust Yourself, what I set out to do was dimensionalize what it means to be a sensitive striver so you can start to create some prioritization around that. So there's 6 key qualities that our type of personality has. The first is sensory sensitivity, which is your nervous system, your physical reaction to situations. So some people can almost feel paralyzed by the level of
Mm.
stress or overwhelm they feel in situations. Then there is thoughtfulness, which is what you're talking about. You can be highly self aware, you can be very caring towards other people, but it can veer over into almost hyper self consciousness. You're so self aware that it kind of goes around in a circle to being so self conscious, or you overthink everything. You go too
Right.
far from deep thought into overthinking. Then there is responsibility. These are those people pleasers. They will put others before themselves to a fault, very loyal, very dedicated, but again, can exhaust you, can turn into over functioning if you are not careful. I is for inner drive, which is that relentless, always trying to be better, pushing yourself to do more, always achieving higher and higher and higher. Great, but the bar can constantly keep moving, so you are never satisfied. Enough never feels like enough.
Yeah.
Then vigilance is about being aware of other people and situations around you, right? You may be very attuned to how mood shifts in a meeting, but sometimes you may over optimize for trying to keep everybody happy,
Mm.
trying to keep everything copacetic. And then last is emotionality, where we as sensitive strivers tend to have big feelings, many feelings, sometimes even conflicting emotions at once. Again, can be a beautiful richness of being able to experience the depth of a lot of those things, but they can get the better of you and run away with you if you are just mired in frustration or anger or annoyance. And so you can hear in each of those strive qualities, they can be a strength or they can be a hindrance if they're
Mm.
unbalanced. And so that is where I we have a strive diagnostic in my business. It is also in the book. So if you get that, you can start with that. But that's a good way to figure out where do I need to zero in? Because each of those has different inroads to how you start rebalancing. If it's overthinking, for example, one of my favorite tools, I'll just give you a really quick tactic around that, is personifying that voice of the inner critic, where for so many of us, and even myself, it becomes just very automatic. It's just the lens of how you
Mm.
see situations through, just that hypercritical I could have done better. This
Yeah.
this could have been more. And so if we can personify that inner critic and make it something separate from us, it gives us just that little moment, that tiny space for pause. I have had clients call theirs, Miranda Priestley from Devil Wears Prada,
Yeah.
or I had one client who he called his Darth Vader. And he got a little Darth Vader Lego action figure that he would keep on his desk. And it was a reminder when, he would start getting in his own way, he would just say, "Not today, Darth. We're not doing this
Right.
today. I don't have
Right.
time for you." And so it was just this little totem, this externalization, and bringing some lightness to that relationship with that inner critic that can just feel so heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard RuPaul talk about this. I'm a big RuPaul fan, and they said that their inner critic, rather than uh, calling it Darth Vader or Miranda Priestley, I can't remember what they called it, but they welcomed it, made it their best friend. And whenever the voice came in, it was like, "Hey, there you are. Haven't seen you for a while. How are you doing?" And it kind of takes all of that sting and nastiness out of it, supposedly.
100%. And that's such a beautiful way to change your relationship with that response that you might have, because many times the inner critic is just trying to protect you. Right? It's like,
Mm,
maybe you shouldn't speak up in that meeting. Maybe you shouldn't reach out to that person. That's risky. What if they reject you? What if they don't like you? What if you say something stupid? Right? And
hmm.
so it's many times it's coming from this good place, trying to look out for you. And yes, if you can just say, if you can reassure it and say, "I know you're trying to do your job, but it's not helping today.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
got this," right?
yeah,
And it may sound a little woo woo, but there is literal psychology behind this idea of distancing yourself from your thoughts, that helps you regain a feeling of control over it,
right,
that it's not just this automatic process.
right. And I don't think there is probably many or even any situations where that inner critic and that self doubt is louder than a high pressure situation like a pitch where we have to spend many weeks preparing for a very small amount of time. And, you know, nearly, not everyone, but nearly everyone I've ever spoken to, no matter how senior, feels that. And if you're new to it, and if you're in a room with far more senior people than you, it can be uh, debilitating, to your point, almost paralyzing, like you said earlier. So, in a pitch situation, we might have our Lego figure because I love that. Is that is that enough to be able to get through something that you might only do once every 3 years?
It's a great question. And if you remember when I talked about the strive qualities, the first one is that sensory sensitivity, the
Right.
physical reaction. And that's very important because many times in these very high pressure situations, you have to manage your physiology before you attempt to manage your
Mm,
psychology. The physical reaction will always trump any mental rigmarole you try to do. And I'm sure everybody listening has seen this. You can tell yourself, "I got this, think positive, you're going to nail this," but you're not believing it, right?
right.
And that's because your body is in this loop of pumping cortisol and adrenaline, and your
Yeah.
body is signaling, "We're in danger. We're at risk. We should slow down. We should not do this." And so you're trying to negate this feedback loop that's happening in your body, of your body saying, "We're in danger." And so we have to calm that physical reaction first, typically when we're talking about these very high pressure situations. And this is where, to your point about it being, yes, maybe it's one, two, three times a year, we need to look for other ways to acclimatize to
Mm,
operating under maybe not the same level of stress, but can we find something that's even 40, 60, 80% similar to that?
Right.
whether it's, volunteering to run the all hands or putting together some, mock sales session where people are throwing objections at you that you might not
Right.
be ready for. But putting yourself in those situations where your body has to mimic operating under that helps it so that it doesn't feel like this huge hump to get over that is uh, I go back to that word of it's just paralyzing to have that level of
Yeah.
stress. It's almost like you haven't trained for it.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great advice. And it's certainly something that I tell, especially more junior people who haven't had experience. They say, I want to do pitching, but I know I'm going to be nervous and I'm not even going to get an opportunity for another X amount of years because no one's going to put me in the room when there's all of these senior people around me. And I said, well, have you watched any good things on Netflix recently? Have you read a good book? Create a presentation, do it to your peers at lunchtime, because you'll start to feel those nerves and same feelings doing that. And you'll start to see body language and see what you struggle with, see what you're good at, see audience reactions. It's all about practice and trying those situations, even in a little mini kind of setting.
Yeah. And I can tell you a quick story about this.
Mm,
Many years ago, when I was first getting into doing more keynote speaking and public speaking as a arm of my business, I knew this about myself that I needed to get the reps in. And so I was able to book a TEDx talk.
mm,
So what I did was typically my prep process would be kind of me reading my script to myself in front of the mirror. And someone had given me this advice to create at least one mock event before the actual TEDx event. And so I was like, you know what? All right, I'll give it a shot. I don't see how this is going to work. But what I did is I was a part of several entrepreneur groups. And
yeah.
I said, I'm giving this presentation. It's totally free. You can RSVP here. And I would say maybe about 15, 20 people did. Now, granted, this was virtual while my TEDx was going to be in person. But still, when that time came, I was debilitatingly nervous.
Right.
And that was the wake-up call to me to think, "Oh, this is why you do this. This is why you do this to work out
Yeah,
the nerves, to work out your timing," because, of course, my talk was longer than I had anticipated, and that
always.
was yeah, that was so valuable to do that, even though my rational mind up front was like, "I don't think this is going to be worth the time. I don't even know these people. I'm not gonna care." But, it that the moment, the
Yeah,
execution moment where it happened was 100% worth it. So I felt like when I was giving my talk, when I was pitching my idea on stage, it was more muscle memory at that
right,
point than recitation.
right. It's also getting some audience feedback before your final audience as well. So I'll start off, if I've got a talk, I'll pitch to the cats, and then eventually I'll get around to the kids and my wife and, maybe some friends. And my natural style is to throw in a few things that are slightly humorous. And with this first audience, it's a bit like the big comedians who do these tiny little dive bars to warm up and test material out. You've got to test stuff because sometimes, if not oftentimes, the things you think are going to really land fall quite flat. And then you'll say an off the cuff remark that wasn't in your script, and people will stand up and applaud. And you think, wow, yeah. And that's how we refine even these, any kind of pitch or presentation, I think. So let's talk about seniority. So your book, Managing Up, talks a lot about this, but I want to talk about it in the setting of a pitch, because often we walk into a room, and even if we're quite senior, we're not as senior as the CEO, for example, of the company we're pitching to. Give me your thoughts on this and how we can manage.
What you just said there is the entire reason why I wrote this book.
Right.
Because after Trust Yourself came out, the number one thing I heard from people in my audience was, I feel confident in myself now. I know I have value to bring to the table. All of that goes out the window when I get in this room with
Right.
I'm a VP, I'm an SVP, but when I get into the room with the CFO, the COO, the board member, all of that feeling of being sure-footed, it goes right out the window. And so
Mm,
that was exactly why I wrote this book, is because you can have that internal confidence, but you need that other piece of the puzzle I
yeah.
was talking about earlier, that ability to influence others. I think for many of us, this comes from a very ingrained belief that we put people who have a title on a pedestal, that
Yeah.
they are better than us, that they are more knowledgeable, that they have more expertise in a certain area. We automatically see them because of their stature as being more untouchable, or uh, we just idealize them. And that psychs so many of us out, when instead, when I'm coaching clients through this, where yes, they have to go present something to the C-suite, for example, and they're really getting in their own head about this. I have them go through and tell me, all right, tell me about this person. Do they have kids? All right. Do you think their kids are well behaved all the time? No, I'm sure they have mornings where, especially if they have a toddler or something like that, they're throwing food all over the floor, or they have a
Mm,
tantrum and now their whole morning is thrown off. And then they get in the car and they hit traffic and they're frustrated and they curse someone out on the way there. And then they go to do their first task of the day and their pen runs out of ink, and they are people just like us. And so if you can go through some of those very humanizing moments that this person 100% has. Yes, maybe it's not to exactly how you're imagining in your head, but take them off that pedestal so you can see, this is me talking more human to human. Yes, they have a different vantage point on the organization or whatever I'm presenting, but also, even if your rank is lower, you are still bringing a valuable perspective to the table, because that more seasoned executive is removed from the day to day work. They may not understand the operational reality that's facing people on the ground that you can inform them on. So, yes, they
mm,
may have role power, but you may have informational power. And
right.
so it's important to remember there's these different facets or different types of power. And just because one person holds one type doesn't mean they hold all of the types.
Yeah. And so it's much less about what we do in the room and more about rewiring our subconscious as much as possible. And I suppose the more we can take one person off a pedestal, the more the other pedestals all slowly, naturally fall around them as well. Just one question. Maybe I'm being pedantic, but I assume we don't want to just imagine them in lots of angry scenarios.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, if you can, just like you, they are someone who probably has those tender moments, or they're sitting there scrolling their reels and, some stupid cat video amuses them as well. Right. So, yes, even if
Yeah.
it's those, sometimes it's easier for people to access some of those frustrating moments, but 100%. Yeah. Those more positive or tender, silly, uh, those are humanizing moments too.
Yeah. So when we're in a room and we've got these different power dynamics, and there might be, because of role, like you said, high role, more knowledge, but they still exist. And what I talk about a lot is the psychology of persuasion, and how it's far more about creating an emotional connection, at least first, rather than going in with hard facts and figures and that information. Are the different tactics for creating emotional connections depending on the person, the level of seniority, that kind of thing?
Yes. A lot of this happens before the meeting. And
Right.
I think that's a big mistake people make, is they spend so much time and energy preparing for that moment that they forget
Yeah.
everything else that happens around it. Why I'm mentioning this is because a lot of that rapport is built in the meeting before the meeting. And so in my work and my programs, we teach this process called pre-wiring, which
Mm.
is connecting with those important stakeholders in advance so that you can preview your thinking, so that you can solicit objections or concerns they might have so they don't sideswipe you in that moment. so that you can build rapport. So this person understands, where is this pitch or proposal or idea? Where is this coming from? Give me the context, because you may only have 10, 15 minutes to get in front of them
Right.
in real time, where you just don't have that space. And so pre-wiring, it doesn't have to happen for every single meeting you have, but you can be wise. There may be high influence, high interest stakeholders, people that have decision-making power and sway over your work, also have a personal investment or passion, stake in the work that you're doing, that you may want to pre-wire with. And that can be as simple as taking 10, 20 minutes to say, hey, before that board meeting that we have, I'd love to get your perspective on the recommendation I'm planning to present. Do you have 20 minutes just so I could get your gut reaction on it and refine it further? That's it. And it allows you to meet person to person. You're not in sort of that pressure cooker, Shark Tank environment, yet they're going to be more likely to let their guard down, to give you their truthful perspective, because they're not having to filter it in front of all of the other people there. So that's the first thing. I'll pause there.
It's so interesting. What I'm thinking is, um, agree with everything you say, but imagine all my competitors are doing the same thing. We all go in for the pre-read meeting, different meetings. We all get the objections. We all do the right thing, which is listen rather than try and do a pre-pitch. It's a pre-listen rather than a pre-pitch. But how do we make them like us more than our competitors? And I don't mean our proposition. I mean, how do we make them like us more?
Yeah. In psychology, there is this idea of the charisma sweet spot, and it is a combination of warmth and competence.
Mm.
And if you imagine sort of a 2 by 2 matrix, someone who is high on warmth and high on competence is typically someone who is striking that right balance of charisma and likability. If you are high on warmth, and by warmth, I mean approachability, you're able to inject a little bit of humor into situations. You're balancing listening with talking about yourself and building building on their ideas. Those are all warmth signals, right? And competence is, I can trust this person. They are reliable. They are credible. They have expertise in this. They may have a background that I respect, or they've been referred to me by someone I respect. Those are competence triggers. And if you are high on warmth, but low on competence, people can pity you because
Mm.
you're nice, but you're not necessarily credible. And if
Right.
you're too high on competence, but low on warmth, then you're just kind of a jerk. I don't want to deal with you because
Right.
you're too smart and I can't relate
Yeah.
to you. And
Yeah.
so that's why it's that sweet spot of those two.
And are there certain personality types that reject
It's
warmth?
a great question. In managing up, I talk about how there are 4 different communication styles, and communication styles that are higher on dominance. They don't reject warmth, but they need less of it to be able
Mm.
to say, I like that guy.
Right.
Whereas someone who is higher on more of a people orientation and lower on dominance, someone who in my vernacular in the book I call a caretaker communication style, they need a bit more warmth over a longer period of time to say, okay, I trust them just because they're a bit of a slower burn.
Um, how do we deduce what personality type someone is, especially if we haven't met them yet, if that's even possible? Are there frameworks out there, either yours or long-standing ones that you use, that you recommend people try and fill out questionnaires to plan this kind of stuff out?
Yeah. We're going to do another 2 by 2, which I
Mhm.
love a good 2 by 2
Yeah, yeah.
matrix. So we talked about warmth versus competence. This one is dominance versus sociability. And there are many different communication style assessments and rubrics out there. They're all largely based on this same psychology that has been looked at for 30, 40 plus years. And it is found, generally speaking, that when people communicate and how they relate to others, it falls in those two dimensions. Dominance is how assertive they are, right? How much do they want to inject their viewpoint? How quickly do they like to move? How goal or outcome oriented are they? And then there is sociability. How much do they value or prioritize relationships with other people or consideration of other people when they are communicating or forming ideas and making decisions? Again, you plot those. And in the book, I call them the 4 C's. And so I already mentioned the commander, which is someone who is high on dominance, lower on sociability. Doesn't mean they
Right.
don't care about people at all, but it's not the first place they go. So the more highly dominant commander is very focused on, all right, what's the expected ROI on this? How long is it going to
Mm,
take? Right. And so I'll loop back to how can you tell these things about a person, but let me go through the four of them first. So you have that commander type, high on dominance, lower on sociability. Then you have the cheerleader, high on both dominance and sociability.
mm,
That's more of your I kind of think of this as like the prototypical sales leader who's higher energy, enthusiastic, like let's go, we got this,
yeah.
very outcome and results oriented, but they because they're more people oriented, you may notice they share more stories and anecdotes. They use more positive language like vision, mission, opportunity. And then we get to the caretaker that I also mentioned earlier. The caretaker's high on sociability, lower on dominance. So this is the person who's more like, let's take it slow. Let's maybe do a test first. They're more cautious. They want to make sure they're optimizing for, is everybody going to be on board with this decision? I want to make sure we've looped this person in first and that person so we have consensus, right?
Yeah.
They're more concerned with how everybody feels about the situation. And then last is the controller. And by controller, this is the person who is low on both of those dimensions, on dominance and sociability. So you may think, well, what the heck is that? If the cheerleader is the prototypical salesperson, then the controller is more like the ops person or the
Right.
developer.
Right.
They're very concerned with process, risk. Is this going to break? And uh, what's step one, step two, step three? They like being in the minutia. They may ask a lot of questions, not because they're trying to be difficult, but they really want to understand the ins and the outs of the situation. I'm sure as I'm saying this, yourself or even the person listening can think, "Oh, I can see myself in maybe one of those more than others." And also the people I work with or I have to sell to or pitch to, eh, I can see what they may fall into. But if you have never met someone, then what do? There's a couple ways around that. Number 1, if you've emailed with them, there can be clues in the way they email.
Mm, I like that. Yeah.
The the commander is the person who responds with very short phrases. They usually don't even put a greeting or a sign off, and they just
Right.
say, "Okay, got it, noted." Right? That's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
commander. Just very fast, blast it out. The cheerleader may be more, "Oh, this sounds like a fantastic opportunity. We're excited to explore this with you." Right? Um, the caretaker, again, may be looping in their colleagues, may be more cautious or hesitant to take a initial call or just take a little more nurturing. And the controller asks for more information than the other types. They may say, "Can you send me a PDF first with all of the technical specifications? Or do you have a deck that I can review in advance?" Because they want to get into the details before they even really speak to you. So you can get some of those initial signals, even just through your initial communication with them.
And once we've got those signals and we know who they are, then we can adjust accordingly how we're pitching, what we're going to say. If we're pitching to a commander, we're going to be short and sweet and get to the ROI quickly. If we're pitching to the others, we give more detail, etc., etc. But here is the impossible question: What do we do when we pitch to all four? Because you've kind of described the C-suite. They are often these four distinct personalities together in one room. Do we lean towards one way? Do you have any thoughts on that? Like I say, I think it is a bit of an impossible question.
Do. I do. And when we work with clients, they have the same exact question. We teach them a layered approach where you
Mm,
are starting with the bottom line. Most people, regardless of their type, they're going to respect what's the bottom line that I'm supposed to take away from this? Tell me why I should be listening to you because you got to catch my attention. We know we have to hook people quickly. So we start with the bottom line expected outcome from today. Like, let's say the solution we're going to present to you today has the potential to save you up to 20% on your energy costs over the next year. Bottom line, right?
right.
Then we go into a little bit of the cheerleader side of kind of pumping the situation up around this is the possible future, this is how it could make an impact for you, right? We're using some of those cheerleader oriented words. Then we get into the caretaker. This is what implementation would look like. We assure that everyone is on board. We have training. We're here to support you and answer your questions. And then last, we get into technical specifications because this is where the controllers can sometimes trip you up at the end because they say, well, what
Right.
about this? Well, what about that? Right. And
Yeah.
so if you were the one up front saying, okay, now I know you may have a lot of questions about this. What is it going to cost? How does the implementation rollout look like? You're answering those FAQs for the controller who may be likely to try to poke holes in everything that you've just shared.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm interviewing you. And I know you'll have an opinion on this, but I don't know what the answer is going to be. But it's a question I get answered a lot, which is related to what you just said, which is when do we tell them how much it's going to cost? Talking money in a pitch, and there's at least two schools of thought. One is rip the band-aid off. Look, it's $1 million. Now, look, calm down. I'm going to tell you all about why, and then you've got it out the way. The other is, I've told you, I know how much you like it. I'm going to close my eyes and tell you it's $1 million at the end of the conversation and see what you say. Well, I think the third school of thought is not mention it. The fourth one is kind of slip it in quick and keep going. So I'll take a breath there. What are your thoughts on talking money?
This decision should come from where you are in your business or the state of whatever you're pitching, right?
Mm,
If you have, and this comes from my own experience as well. When I was earlier in my journey, I was not upfront with my rates, mostly not out of trying to trick anybody, but because they may have been changing, or more specifically, I was customizing packages for people because I didn't
yeah.
sort of have a standard that I was offering. And so I think this has to be informed with where you're coming from and what you're trying to optimize for. You may be at a place where you are using price as a filter to knock people out of the discussion.
Yeah,
And
true.
so it may be advantageous for you up front to say, well, this costs $10,000 before we go any further. Is that within the realm of possibility for what you're looking for? So I think that decision, first and foremost, has to come from your approach and what you're trying to achieve right now.
So we've talked about a number of things so far. We've talked about likability. We've talked about different personality types. We've talked about pre-meetings. We've talked a little bit about confidence and trusting yourself, and hence that helps with nerves as well. What else have we got in our toolkit in the world of persuading someone that our idea, product, service is the one they should go for?
Earlier on in our conversation, I was mentioning that idea of social proof.
Mm,
This is a concept that gets talked a lot about in marketing, but it is so useful in a business or even a corporate situation. and I think very underused. And there's so many ways to utilize it. When I am working with clients and they're trying to build credibility, let's say a lot of people I work with are in large multinational organizations. There's a matrix that they're having to work across. And so social proof can look like some of the ways we may typically think about it in marketing. It may be we have relationships with these vendors, or these organizations have used our product before, or have, um, these regulatory bodies have approved this product. So we can use those literal emblems. But when we're working with people and they're having to have these daily conversations where they're trying to get buy-in, it's little mentions of, "Oh, I've already talked to Susan in accounting and they were on board, or they gave their blessing for how we're thinking about structuring this. And so are you okay with me moving ahead to just work with them directly?" You have, by doing that, by saying Susan from accounting, who Susan from accounting should be someone that that person knows. And
Right.
ideally, you have a good guess that they respect, but it helps shortcut that buy-in process, because if Susan has already vetted it, then I guess it's okay. I guess it must be good, or I'm going to minimize the amount of questions that I have for you. And so that can be a really powerful lever to persuade someone in an ethical way.
Mm.
Yeah.
Because I mean, certainly in the industry I come from, the technology industry, it all boils down to trust. And, there's a number of companies all presenting essentially the same solution. And you're like, well, which one am I going to choose? The prices are about the same, but even if one's slightly higher, it doesn't make that much difference. So it's, who do I trust is actually going to do this on time with the lowest risk? And I think social proof is definitely one of the strongest ways to build trust. Is it? What? How else can we build trust?
Mm. Yeah. When we think about trust, there's a few different elements to it. And one of the most underestimated ones is benevolence.
Mm,
Does somebody feel like you are for them, that you will
right.
have their back? In managing up, the way I talk about this is there's a chapter called the feedback conversation. How do you give criticism to people that are more powerful than you, which can be very tricky because, as you were saying before, the power dynamic is uneven. Usually,
Yeah.
criticism should roll downhill, it's not
Right.
something you give uphill. And so, in that case, we can create trust through benevolence by creating a shared goal from the outset of that conversation, to say, I think we can both agree we want to do what's best for the client here,
Mm,
right? And now we're both on the same side of the table rather than against each other. Rather than you saying, I think we should do this, you think we should do that. It's, we're both working towards the same ultimate vision or shared goal. We're both trying to make sure that we hit our OKRs or our numbers this quarter, right? Would you agree with that? Great. Now you've got that micro commitment, and you've shown this person, I'm on your side. I'm trying to help you achieve your goals. So let's figure out how this is coming from a place of wanting to get there and optimize how we move forward.
right. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to flip now. We're flipping through a few different topics here, but if we flip to influence, because a lot of your work is about influence as well, and a lot of what we've talked about is really about influence. What are the signs in the room that we know we are influencing, or red flags that we're going the wrong way in a conversation? And what do we do if we see those?
This is interesting because uh, I think most people would say, well, I know I'm influencing if I'm getting less pushback, right? If people are just buying in and saying, yeah, that sounds great, let's go. That's not always the case. It it's about the quality of the questions you are getting, right? If people are engaging more deeply and thoughtfully with what you're presenting, that can be a sign that you are influencing effectively, because
Yeah.
people are actually evaluating the solution you have instead of just brushing it off. right?
Mm.
And that is tricky. That is a nuance because sometimes, um, agreement is not the same as buy-in. You may present something, and everyone in the room goes, "Okay, great, thank you for your time today." You've gotten a very surface level, "Good job, attaboy," but you may not have influenced anyone in that room to take action differently. And and so I think that's one of those those things you realize with maturity is, uh, are people engaging with you and asking, okay, so if we do it this way, then what happens 3 months from now? Do we renew the contract? Do we start working with somebody differently on your team? Right? That's an engagement question,
Yeah.
which can be a sign that they're thinking about taking the next step with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I would compare it to a kind of a door-to-door salesman almost, or someone with a certain ideological beliefs that come to your door, and you say, "Ah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. I'll have a good read of this. Thank you. Goodbye, 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 goodbye." Shut the door. They know that you're not going to read the leaflet or do anything about it if that's the reaction that you've got. Now, all of this is fantastic advice, but coming back to maybe one of the first things that we talked about, these sensitive strivers, which, when I think about all of the people who I work with, which is many, I think more people than less probably fall into this category. It must be pretty common. How do we, and this is an important question, how do we stop ourselves from burning out, breaking down, doing too much because we can't stop ourselves from trying to get somewhere?
Yeah. This is that responsibility aspect of the strive qualities on overdrive, right? Where we are dedicated, we want to see something through, we're loyal to a fault many
Yeah.
times. And what I see a lot of my clients get into is a dynamic where they are over functioning. I used that word earlier, where they are doing more than anybody is asking them to do and more than is necessary. And that can create this dynamic where other people underfunction
Mm.
because you are always the one pushing something over the finish line or swooping in if it's not done or rescuing someone or a situation or a deal. Then other people on the team learn, well, Danny's got it. Even if it's subconscious, they may not literally think, well, I'm going to step back because he just always steps in. It becomes the dynamic that you fall into.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so where a lot of sensitive strivers get freaked out about this is they immediately jump to, okay, so you're saying I have to just let people fail and I just have to step back and let the balls drop. That's not what I'm saying here. Because we don't want to go from 0 to 100.
Right.
It's not a good situation for anyone. But you do need to look for low stakes situations where you perhaps in a team meeting, you are not the first one that raises your hands when someone
Right.
asks, "Oh, who's going to put together the deck for this?" Rather than you saying, "Okay, I'll do it," because there's the uncomfortable silence of no one speaking up.
Yeah.
You hang back. We need to learn to tolerate that discomfort. And that's a big skill we are working on with our sensitive strivers all of the
Yeah.
time is the tolerance for that emotional discomfort and not being the one to emotionally soothe and step in and rescue. And this even happens with superiors, right? Where a superior asks us something, we really don't want to do it. And so we may initially say, well, I don't think that's something I can really fit in. And then the superior says, well, I thought you were a team player or we really need this done. And you immediately cave, right? Because you
Yeah.
want to just get rid of your emotional discomfort and the other person's. And so that is something to really look out for is that over functioning. And sometimes you just need go to scripts and phrases. Like for example, in that idea of pushing back and saying no, one of the techniques I teach in the book is called the trade-off approach
Hmm.
of I hear both of these things are important. in order to fit in X, we have to temporarily slow down on Y. We can do that. I'm happy to divert those resources to get that done. Are you okay with that? Like, do I have the green light to move ahead with that? So
Right.
you're surfacing, hey, we can't do both of these, but you're putting the ultimate decision making power back in the hands of that person
Mm.
with authority. You can make the final call here. I've given you a plan for how I would like to execute it. Just tell me yes or no, but ultimately you have to give me that. So it's a great way to show, hey, I'm being a team player because I want to get both of these done successfully and to the degree and the quality that we're known for. So we'll slow down on this in order to prioritize that, but just not caving in every time that
Yeah.
emotional discomfort comes up.
Giving them the choice is a really good one. But also saying no is a good one as well sometimes. And you you quite rightly said, look, I'm not telling everyone just drop the ball. We're not going from 0 to 100, but sometimes I think you do have to allow balls to be dropped and you have to watch them clanging around on the ground. And it can actually be a really good way of highlighting your worth for not being there.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And what I mean by that is, be judicious with it,
Right.
where
Yeah.
maybe you don't do this for your top client that's 60% of your, quarterly revenue. But but yes, I have had situations. I'm thinking of one client in particular who there was some reporting that another team was really supposed to be responsible for, but they would never get done on time. So my client really just de facto became that person who would push this over the fence. And so what she did was reset that dynamic. She found a contextual reason to bring up why this change was happening. Like, hey, it's the beginning of the year, or beginning of the quarter, or we just ended this project and we're reassessing responsibilities and our bandwidth. So moving forward, I know this is has generally fallen to me, but really this belongs in your team's scope. It makes more sense for you to run point on these for this reason. So here's all the handoff you need. We'll look to you to handle these. And when they didn't, because it doesn't always happen that cleanly, you can have that
Yeah.
reset conversation and people still don't follow through at first. But when it didn't happen cleanly, to your point, she would let it drop. Things didn't get, those deliverables didn't get to the C-suite in time.
Yeah.
They were angry. And
Yeah.
so she would redirect to, this has been passed off to this other team. This
Yeah.
is the best person for you to bring this up with. And guess what? After 1, 2 times of that happening, that team did get their act together
Probably
eventually.
one, right?
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
yes, you do have to let people face the brunt of their consequences. You just want to be wise about how you're choosing to do that, because at the end of the day, you may still be accountable for certain results.
Yeah.
So, you need to make sure you're protected on that front.
So let me just bring it back to one more point about money. Because we talked about when to mention money, etc. But talking about money in general is really quite difficult. And what happens if we want to have more of a conversation about it, including things like asking for more money?
Yeah, it's daunting, right? Because
Right.
we don't want to seem greedy, we don't want to seem like we're trying to milk someone. And whether you are you're raising your prices for your product, let's say, or you're asking your boss for a raise or a higher bonus or whatever it is, usually what people go to is, here's why I have earned this. Here's why I am worth this amount, right? I deserve this. And that's not a convincing case for your manager or your customer, because they say, that's great, but essentially, I don't care.
Yeah.
And
I've
in many
chosen to
cases,
not give it to you anyway.
yes.
Yeah.
Or in many cases, when, because I'm working with a lot of corporate professionals, their manager will say, I understand, but that was you just doing your job. So good on
Mm.
you that you've earned what we already pay you, but I don't see why we should pay you more. The key here when you're asking for more money, regardless of the context, is to frame it in fairness. And so, what I mean is, especially in the corporate context, when I have people approaching their boss, we will work on scripts like, here is what I accomplished last year. We also do future pacing. If I move from director to VP, here's the additional scope I would be able to take on and what that would produce for the
Mm,
organization. And it would seem fair to adjust my salary to X based on that additional scope.
right.
So, notice what's happening there. We're not just talking about the past and what's been done, we're also pacing the future. And the words I used were couched in fairness,
Yeah.
writing the scales. And so you can use words like it would seem fair, or it would be commensurate with, this is a reasonable market rate or reasonable competitive rate for this if you're, raising your price on a product. But that sort of language around fairness, it makes it so it feels more like reciprocity and an even exchange. And it also triggers the person to feel like, well, I want to be fair. I want to be
Yeah.
someone who is a reasonable person. And so it triggers someone to want to act consistently with that perception.
And they're also thinking not just fairness, but yes, I would like those extra things that you're offering for the additional money that you're asking for.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, perfect. All right, let's talk a little bit just about your experience. What is the best pitch, presentation, talk you've ever done? Walk me through it. Why did it feel so good?
There have been a number of times in my business where I have been the one pitched, whether it is by for example, I'm thinking of a website and branding designer, or
Right,
even coaches work with coaches. So even my personal coach.
right.
And the number one thing that made any of those pitches stand out to me is they made me feel seen. They made me feel like, how are you reading my mind? How are you inside my head and know what I'm struggling with or understand the nuances of what I'm trying to achieve? And that immediately shortcut my level of buy-in for whatever, because I said,
Right.
you know my situation. It gave me belief that they could solve it. And
Yeah.
so those are the types of situations where it's sort of like take my money
Yeah.
situations. But that is huge for me in particular, is being understood at that very specific level. And I'm not just saying you want to grow your business. No, not like that. But we understand that you don't want to be tied to your computer all day on Zoom for 10 plus hours, to the point where you feel like you've done nothing, yet you still feel exhausted at the end of the day.
Yeah.
The emotional vividness of that and the specificity is really
Yeah.
what has pulled me in and convinced me.
So what if we flip that? I mean, the polar opposite might be someone who's not at all being empathetic or done their research into your real pain points. But what are the other kind of red flags or bad things that you've seen, bad behaviors when people have pitched to you?
Yes, and I love my clients, and I hope any of them listening know this comes from a place of me caring for them. But I have seen some pretty not good to terrible pitches from my clients who are professionals at some of the world's uh, biggest companies.
Yeah.
And the why they're not good is they lead with me. They
Mm,
lead with, here's what I have to offer, here's the features of it, here's what we're trying to do. I don't care.
right.
I don't care. Or
Right.
I'm thinking of one client in particular. She was trying to sell this new change management initiative into her
Yeah.
organization. And she was just presenting data. So what I mean by that is, she had taken, I think it was a employee survey of some folks, and she was presenting to the committee the findings of this survey. And she was just presenting Here's the rates we got back. Here was some of the feedback. There was
Right.
no sense making. There was no selling of what this data meant. It was just literal numbers and r- naked responses on a page. And
Yeah.
that's a big mistake I see from people is even small things like on your PowerPoint slide real estate. That headline, too many people will waste that with things like features or
Titular
pricing.
headlines. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Versus saying something like the all in one solution for XYZ versus something
Mm,
that's more benefit. And so
yeah.
if there's any piece of advice that would be it.
And I think there's nothing wrong with data, of course, though. But I think, what you can do is you can really tell a story with the data or tell the story behind the data. So those numbers don't just become lost in a sea of other numbers, but they can have a really big impact as the punchline for a great story, I think.
Exactly.
Melody, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. Where can people find you? What do you offer the world that people might want to find and sign up to and give you lots of money for?
You can connect with me at my website. It's just melodywilding.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm very, very active on there. And I always love to hear what people take away from the episode.
Fantastic. And for everyone listening, what is your final thought? What are your final words of wisdom for the listeners in all of this crazy world of psychology, behavior, emotion, pitching?
Well, let's speak directly to those sensitive strivers, which is that the assets you have, your sensitivity can be a tremendous gift. Being someone who is perceptive, observant, who is willing to understand someone's pain points and their desires and reflect that back to them because you do have that level of empathy, that can be such a huge competitive edge in a time where most people are not willing to go that extra mile.
Yeah. And if you read the books, you'll understand exactly how to harness it. Melody, thank you so much for your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. I hope we stay in touch. And I'll put all of the links to your stuff up in the show notes.
Likewise, thank you.
You have been listening to Pitchmasters with me, your host, Danny Fontaine. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. Do follow, like, share, stay in touch because I've got plenty more fabulous guests coming up in the near future. You can also pick up a copy of my book, Pitch: How to Captivate and Convince Any Audience on the Planet from all good bookstores and online all over the world. You can also find me on all the social media channels. Just look for Danny Fontaine or Pitch Guy, and we can carry on the conversation. But until next time, happy pitching.